To those of you who attended our 2017 fundraising dinner, the board and I want to thank you for supporting this mission and ministry. To those of you that weren't able to attend, we're very happy to make this video available to you. As a reminder, Faith Ascent's mission is to reduce the number of professing Christian teenagers abandoning their beliefs in college and then disengaging from the church. We envision a world where every college-bound Christian connects with Christian community and leaves home prepared with good reasons for the hope they have in Jesus. To everyone watching, strategic philanthropy or strategic giving is the process of identifying what you want to see the world look like and then using your donations strategically to actualize that vision. At least 60% of college-bound Christians will abandon their beliefs and disengage from the church. Most of them say that intellectual skepticism is a major deciding factor. Since 2010, we've trained and equipped 450 students representing nearly 60 different churches. Of that 450, 296 are still in high school, 108 are in college currently, and 47 have graduated college. Of the 108 that are still in college, 103 are still professing Christians. That's 95%. 92 are still active in a local church. That's 85%. Of the 47 that graduated from college, 44 are still professing Christians. That's 94%. And 40 are still active in a local church. That's 85%. Friends, we're taking measurable steps toward actualizing our mission and our vision. If our goals align with your goals, please prayerfully consider making a donation today. Take care and God bless. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain Faith Ascent's mission. I'm going to explain what motivates our mission. I'm going to talk a little bit about our student programs, including Base Camp, and I'm also going to highlight the results that we've been achieving. Before I do any of that, though, let's pray together, all right? King Jesus, I pray that I don't get in the way of anything that you want to say tonight. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, I just pray that you'd be glorified here, our time together. I pray that you would bring good to us and good to the students that we're trying to serve. And I pray all these things in your holy name, Jesus. Amen. So, Faith Ascent's mission is it's pretty clear. Our mission is to reduce the number of Christians abandoning their beliefs in college and disengaging from the church. Now, does anyone in here know roughly what percentage of professing Christian teens will abandon their beliefs in college and then disengage from the church? Raise your hand if you have an informed guess. Just raise your hand. Any guesses here? Yeah, Lee? 65%? Any other guesses? Yeah, back here? So, according to the most recent research, somewhere between 58 and 88% of professing Christian teens will not carry their beliefs into adult life. It's at least 60% if you're optimistic. Now, I know a lot of you here personally, and I know that these aren't just abstract numbers to most of the people in this room, at least a few of you, that you can actually put faces to these statistics. Family members, students in your youth group, friends. Does anybody know why this is happening? Any guesses? Any guesses? I mean, multiple factors for sure, but George? Lack of intellectual support for the faith. You read ahead, didn't you, George? Yeah, you cheated a little bit. Yeah, so again, the factors are legion, but one of the common themes or one of the common threads with ex-Christians is intellectual skepticism. It's a major deciding factor according to the stats. And it's not the only factor, but again, it's a common theme. So when you and I, when we take the time to actually listen to the stories of the young people that are represented in this image by shadows, we often hear a real lack of confidence. Lack of confidence in Christianity as an intellectually satisfying worldview. If we lean in and listen, we'll hear a real lack of confidence as Christianity as a reliable source for answers to the questions that they're asking, as well as the questions that they're being asked. In record numbers, bright young people are concluding that Christianity is silly at best, and that it's harmful at worst, and that Christianity has very little to say about the world that they live in. Now, granted, the world that they live in, the world that young people are growing up in, is very different from the world that even I grew up in. It's different from the world my parents grew up in. It's different from the world my grandparents grew up in. But still, it ought not be this way. Intellectual skepticism should not be counted on the list of reasons why young people are walking away from the faith. And here's why. Forget for just a moment all of the experiential and personal evidence that we have as Christians. Christianity has, I think, an unfair advantage in the marketplace of ideas, let's call it, in that what we believe is actually true. And so, because what we believe is true, it's actually anchored to, you could say, honest science and sound philosophy and objective morality. And in the person and work of Jesus Christ, most importantly, it's anchored to human history. The resurrection is anchored to human history. And by the way, I know that we're mostly Christians in this room. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but how many of you agree with what I just said? How many of you have, let's just say, a proper confidence in what I just said? I'm not talking about certainty, but just a proper confidence. Just raise your hand if what I said is something that you are confident in. Okay? Now, put your hands down. Don't raise them again, but let me ask you, how many of you are confident in your ability to defend that claim in a non-Christian environment? I'm not talking about an academic setting even. I'm talking about around the water cooler. I'm talking about at the dinner table. I'm talking about in the youth group with your teenagers. Christianity is, in a number of ways, intellectually defensible, but most believing adults, we're not real confident in our ability to explain it. And by extension, most college-bound Christian teens never hear these things explained at home or in church. So if you're here tonight, and if you take away nothing else, please take away this. Young Christians have a multitude of intellectually satisfactory reasons for taking the Holy Scriptures seriously and for taking the claims of Christ seriously. And the fact that 60% don't know this is a real tragedy. Recently we did a survey, about 100 students from about 50 different churches, and we asked them these questions. We asked, is this type of training important to evangelism? 94% said yes. That is the intellectual training. We asked them, is this type of training important to your faith? 91% said yes. We asked, is this taught in your youth groups? 72% said no, it's not taught. We asked, is this taught in your church? 59% said no, it's not taught. Now, I'm not here to cast stones, by the way. I live in a glass house, okay? I love the church. But friends, it ought not be this way. This, by the way, this is our mission motivator. This is what gets me up on Monday morning. This is why the ministry exists, and that's how we got started. Quick history. Back in 2007, a group of forward-thinking Christians from a church in West County, they decided to put some time, talent, and treasure into a ministry model that would address this problem. Many of these men and women are in the room tonight. In 2009, a denominationally diverse board of directors were put in place. They began to think through effective strategies for what I like to call youth ministry reform. And in the spring of 2010, I transitioned out of the legal industry as a consultative sales rep into full-time ministry with Faith Ascent. Just a few months after I came on board, with the help of volunteers, local churches, professors, we launched our very first summer camp aimed at Christian teenagers, and we called it Base Camp. How many of you have ever been mountain climbing? Has anybody ever been mountain climbing? A few of you? So Base Camp is the starting place for an activity or expedition. It's what you need to participate in to make sure you don't die on the mountain. So we call our summer camp Base Camp, and this is the group of students that attended that very first camp in 2010. We had 30 students there, roughly, and in the middle is our friend Sean McDowell. It's Josh McDowell's son. You may recognize him. But these students showed up to this event for prayer and for fellowship and for fun and all the things that you would expect at a Christian summer camp. But most importantly, they showed up to think through the big questions of their faith. Learning from real professors and authors in real lecture halls, in a real college environment. They were getting a taste of college life, and they were getting a crash course in Christian apologetics. Let me show you our timeline, by the way. So that was 2010. Since then, we've planned and executed 8 different summer camps. The first 3 were at Missouri Baptist University. As we grew, we had to move venues. The last 5 camps have been at Lindenwood University. In 2010, shout out to Lindenwood. In 2010, we had 33 students. In 2011, we had 52 students. 12, we had 71. 13, we had 96. 2014, we had 100. 15, we had 112. 16, we had 121. And last year, we had 157 students attending this crash course in Christian apologetics. And believe me, we're not selling camp based on the music or throwing candy or polar bears on unicycles. These kids are coming in to learn why Christianity is believable. And Base Camp's grown significantly. So we've trained 450 college-bound Christian teenagers representing 55 different churches since then. And beyond that, the number of Christian professors and pastors, authors, and trained apologists that take time out to teach our students has grown significantly. This is just a snapshot of some of the speakers that were at Base Camp last year and the year before. And our greatest asset has always been, I think, our teaching team and the quality of our teachers. And God's been really gracious to us in terms of helping us identify the questions that kids are asking and then helping us to find the speakers that are capable of answering these questions with some degree of expertise. We've got Concordia Seminary represented on this board, or on this slide, Covenant Theological Seminary, Lindenwood University, Missouri Baptist University, St. Louis University, and Washington University, just to name a few. And these speakers represent different churches and different denominations. There's a real unity, you could say. There's diversity in our teachers, and we love it that way. And just a side note, some of you noticed this already, but sometimes we're accused of being a little pretentious when it comes to choosing speakers at Base Camp. And as you can see here, we have very strict criteria. For some of these folks, unless they have cool parents, they're not teaching. For others, unless they're very cuddly, I'm talking to you, Mr. Schulten, they're not teaching. So anyway, I jest, but we have great speakers and teachers, and we're very thankful for them. And from time to time, Pastors will sometimes ask me, they'll say, can you come in to our church to talk about, let's say, New Testament textual criticism or evolution and science? And I say, no. But I know someone who can. And so that brings us to my next slide here. And these are just a few of the different seminars that we've conducted with different churches in St. Louis. After we identify questions that members of your churches are asking, we try to do our best to help you link up those questions with the right speakers. Base Camp certainly is our biggest event of the year. It's our flagship event. It's what we're known for, but it's not our only event. It's not our only event. It's actually part of a bigger, you could say, program strategy. Free surveys, okay? And by the way, we're going to zone in on this for just a second. We want to make sure that we're actually answering the questions that young people are asking and not answering the questions that we hope that they're asking because we happen to have a Bible study attached to it. So we survey youth group students to get a read on the questions and doubts that they have. After that, we try to link up, as I said, the right speakers with the right topics in the right venues to get this content into the heads and hearts of these students. Of course, we talked about Base Camp. After Base Camp, we help our students to connect with college campus ministries all over the country. And by the way, this is one of the most important things that we do. I don't know how many of you are involved in campus ministry or support campus ministries. We have a few of you in the room, but this is critical. At that age, these students need to be connected with Christian community. I'm telling you, when you get to college, it's hard enough to find the bathroom, let alone campus ministry. And we want to stack the deck. We want to make sure that these students are being pursued by campus ministers, and we don't want to leave them to pursue campus ministry. So we help them to connect with campus ministries. So this is our program flow chart. This is what we've been doing since 2010, and I believe that all of these programs work best together and that they're producing the most favorable outcomes together. And so what are our outcomes? I'm very glad you asked. Out of 450 students since 2010, 295 of those students are actually still in high school, so I don't have any numbers on them. But I do have some numbers here. 108 Faith Ascent students that are still in college. Out of that 108, 103 are still professing Christians, and 92 are still active in a local church. Yes, that's helpful. Thank you. So let's talk about the college graduates. Of the 47 Faith Ascent students that have actually graduated from college, 44 are still professing Christians, and 40 are still active in a local church. Now listen, these aren't perfect results, okay? And there's a lot of work left to be done, but by God's grace, I think the work that we're doing here, I think it's important. I think we're on to something. So that being said, part of our vision statement reads like this. We envision a world where every college-bound Christian teen connects with Christian community on campus and leaves home prepared with good reasons for the hope that they have in Jesus. And as most of you know, this last bit is a reference to 1 Peter 3:15, which reads like this. Always be ready to offer a defense or to offer a response or to offer a word back to anyone who asks you the reason for the hope that is in you, yet do this with gentleness and respect. And that's our vision for these students, that they'll leave home equipped with good reasons for the hope they have in Jesus. And they can actually offer a reply to the skeptics in their sphere of influence, but most importantly, to their inner skeptic. Over the next several minutes, our keynote, John Inazu, and I are going to be discussing the contents of his newest book. It's called Confident Pluralism, Surviving and Thriving Through Deep Difference. But before I do that, let me just say that John has been very gracious to us. in a multitude of ways, not least of which is simply making himself available this evening. Just this morning, I was looking at his calendar on the website, and in addition to, past appearances on Fox News and C-SPAN and on some show with the VeggieTales guy, Phil Vischer, that was a good one. Over the next few months, he's going to be speaking about his book at Dordt College, at Northwestern College, at Bethel College, at Notre Dame, Calvin College, Virginia Tech, Covenant College, and the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. And that's just up into March. So we're very thankful to have John here tonight. And I want to say I appreciate you being with us, but also thanks for the help you've given me personally over just the last few days. So as you make your way up here, John, we're going to sit here and chat. We thought we would do something a little bit different. Instead of having more people in suits deliver monologues, we're actually going to do sort of a Q&A style, and they mic'd you up, right? You're good? All right, excellent. So as I read John's bio, John Inazu is the Sally D. Danforth Distinguished Professor of Law and Religion at Washington University, right here in St. Louis, in our backyard. He teaches courses in criminal law, law and religion, and the First Amendment. His scholarship focuses on the First Amendment, freedoms of speech, assembly, and religion, and related issues of political and legal theory. John is on the board of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and is a frequent contributor to Christianity Today. He served as a volunteer leader, also with Young Life, and as the high school youth director at Blacknall Presbyterian Church in Durham, North Carolina. He and his wife, Caroline, are members of Central Presbyterian Church, that is, here in Clayton, Missouri. Randy calls it Central Pres. I can't help it. Let me add, John wants everyone in the room to know that despite the confident pluralism of his academic training, a BSE and JD from Duke and a PhD from UNC-Chapel Hill, he still remains an avid Duke fan. That being said, so give John a hand as I make my way over here. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Oh, that's loud. All right. So, John, before we jump in, on your website, there are several pages of praise quotes from both Christians and non-Christians. I just picked out a couple that I thought would really set the stage. Pastor Tim Keller in New York, Redeemer, says this. He says, "Confident pluralism is a great and important book. It's a way forward. Get it, use it." The one that I like the most out of, again, dozens, was from Michael Gerson at the Washington Post. He says, "Every once in a while, a book comes along that perfectly suits a cultural moment, not by reflecting the prevailing ethos, but by challenging it at its deepest level." John, tell us a bit about confident pluralism and what you're trying to get at in this book.
So I'd like to start by just pointing out that UCD family let out a big hurrah for their own name, and Central Pres, where were you when they mentioned Randy?
It's a real treat to be with you all tonight, and thanks for taking time to be here with Faith Ascent. And Jeremy, thanks for the invitation to be with you. So I'll in a second, sort of sketch the overview of my book, put out some teasers, so hopefully you'll read it. But I would love soon, in short order, to turn to some of the topics we were just hearing about. Given my own background and passion for youth ministry and college ministry, I think there's a direct connection to the kinds of issues I'm talking about in this book and how we as Christians, and particularly young Christians, can think about and engage in the current moment. But let me just do a short overview of the book itself, and I'll get us there by way of a story, take you back to earlier this year, probably something that most people who aren't lawyers don't follow, but there was a Senate confirmation hearing for a low-level Office of Management and Budget employee in the Trump administration. Now, most people probably can't even name what that office does, so it was a relatively unimportant hearing in the big scheme of things. But Senator Sanders was at the hearing, and someone on Senator Sanders' staff had found out that this particular nominee, Russell Vogt, was a graduate of Wheaton College, and in something around Wheaton College, Russell had written in print about Islam and Muslims. Muslims, because they don't believe in Jesus, stand condemned. So there was a direct kind of exclusive truth claim there. not unlike the claims that many Christians hold, many Jews hold, many Muslims hold. But Senator Sanders was not at all happy with the quote, and there was a long exchange back and forth, and he said, this quote, this sentiment that you have expressed, Russell Vogt, is not what America is about. I'm not going to vote for you. You don't deserve to be in office. Now, I thought about that, and I thought, well, Senator Sanders would have had every right to have asked Russell Vogt, are you going to treat every citizen equally under the law, regardless of his or her faith? And the answer to that has to be yes, or you don't belong in office. But to say, because you have an exclusive truth claim as part of your faith commitments, that you don't represent what this country is about, I thought, with respect, Senator Sanders, that's exactly wrong. That's precisely what our country is about. It's living with the deepest differences that really matter. And so I wrote this in a note to Senator Sanders and sent him a copy of my book. I haven't heard back yet, but it's still early. It's only been a few months. But the sentiment that Senator Sanders expressed and that we see kind of in our social media feeds quite often is this idea that we can't figure out a way to live with our deepest differences, or that we don't have them. And part of the reason I wrote this book is to say, first of all, we have to recognize at ground truth we have very deep and very irreconcilable differences over the issues that really, really matter. And those aren't going away anytime soon. So we're left with a practical problem in need of a political solution. And we have one answer to that problem from Rousseau, the French philosopher, who said, it is impossible for men to live at peace with those they think are damned. Now that's a pretty sobering quote, right? If you fall asleep to that one tonight, it's not a good prognosis. And part of what I'm suggesting is we have to have a different option than that. So that's what I wrote about. That's what Confident Pluralism is about. There are two parts to the book, and I'll just explain the two briefly, and then move on to some other topics. There's a legal part, and there's a civic personal part. So what does the law have to do, and what do we have to do? Now for the legal part, I'm just going to give you a teaser, and this is a teaser to go read the book to find out more. But I want to suggest that the core of the legal protections we have to have in this country in order to figure out this alternative to Rousseau is paradoxically to strengthen the protections for our deepest differences. Now that seems weird. We might think we need to lessen protections so we can all come together, but actually, unless we are authentic about our differences and find ways to protect them, we're going to have a kind of false, unstable peace that's not going to last. So we need these protections that strengthen our abilities to differ. I think these are foregrounded in the First Amendment's right of assembly. My first book was on the right of assembly. If you haven't heard about the right of assembly, you're in good company. 1 in 10 Americans can name it. But it is there. It's one of the 5 rights in the First Amendment. And more interestingly, I think, it is the only right in the First Amendment that requires more than one person. So the First Amendment has 5 rights: speech, press, religion, petition, and assembly. You can do any of those other 4 by yourself in some fashion. You cannot assemble alone. So what does that suggest? Well, among other things, I think that suggests that from the beginning, the framers recognized that there was a set of values and concerns in the First Amendment that saw us not just as individuals, but as people who form groups and relationships. And from there, a lot can happen in terms of the ways in which we are actually formed. And we know this, right? Our deepest commitments come out of churches and ministries and colleges and universities and private associations where we figure out beliefs and we form solidarity with other people. And there's something to this groupness that's lost if we don't hit on the importance of assembly. A lot of the discourse today is about my free speech rights, right? Or my right to this and that. But assembly is our rights as people and groups. And so I'm going to leave it at that, but to suggest that there are some important legal concepts that we have to figure out. Now, those of you who are scared of a law professor writing a book, I'll say I wrote this in a way to be accessible. So the chapter on the law is framed around the television show Parks and Recreation. This is about stories that we can relate to, not abstract legal concepts. But I want to spend maybe a little more time talking about the second part, which is what do we do as citizens when the law runs out? So it turns out, despite the need for constitutional protections, we can do a lot. Think about the free speech right. You can say almost anything to anyone. Now, there are a couple exceptions. What are they? For the lawyers and law students in the room, what can't you do with speech? Fire in a crowded theater, except if the theater is on fire, you can yell fire, right? But assuming there's no fire in the theater, you can't yell fire. You can't commit perjury, you can't engage in insider trading, you can't form a criminal conspiracy. But outside of that, you can say almost anything to anyone, including the speech that harms people psychologically, defamatory speech in most contexts, hate speech, and that puts a lot of pressure on us to be responsible in the speech that we get to say. So how do we think about the speech that we get to say, and how do we think about our relationships with other people and how we treat people, particularly across difference? And so I lay out in this book 3 different, I call them aspirations, and maybe we can get back to that, but 3 aspirations: tolerance, humility, and patience. And I'll just say a word on each, and then Jeremy can press me hard for clarity. But starting with tolerance, by tolerance, and this is an important redefinition against the understanding of tolerance that is prevalent on a lot of college and university campuses. Tolerance does not mean acceptance. Today, a lot of people will say, you don't fully tolerate me unless you completely accept me in everything I do, say, and am. Now, if we spent a little time thinking about that, it's actually a philosophical impossibility. We simply can't tolerate everyone in that sense. But there is a sense in which we can tolerate by way of endurance, that we recognize to the maximal extent possible other people can pursue their own beliefs and practices, and we can separate the people from the ideas they hold. So that's tolerance. Humility is the idea, and this runs into some of what you were talking about earlier, but the way that we engage with other people sometimes pushes us to the limit of recognizing that we can't always prove why we're right and they're wrong. We can have well-formed, rational, logical, intellectual arguments for faith and all kinds of other things, but sometimes the distance between someone who's into a different worldview completely and our starting point is insurmountable, and so there's a humility in the way in which we engage with other people that says, I'm not always going to be able to prove why I'm right and you're wrong. And then patience, the idea that we start with the presumption of wanting to listen toward understanding and empathy. Patience doesn't get us, again, to acceptance. So it could be that my patient listening with you makes me realize you were just as crazy as I thought, or your beliefs were as wrong and immoral as I thought. But I can at least start with the posture that says, I'm going to listen as charitably as possible to your understanding of the world, to why you hold your beliefs, and be in it for the relationship and the conversation. So that's tolerance, patience, and humility, the way in which we can engage in our individual lives, even when the law is not going to tell us what to do.
Well, first of all, I'm really glad that you brought it back down to earth. I think you yourself said that most of us don't live in the world of legal opinions, so the more personal side of the book is helpful. Tell me, why do you, when you're talking about tolerance, humility, patience, why do you use the term aspirations?
Right, yeah, so good pickup there. I initially wrote this book and wanted to talk about the virtues of tolerance, humility, and patience, the deeply embedded practices that we habitually do in the world. And as I thought about it, I thought actually virtues, because they're practices, require a kind of habituation that comes through institutions that believe in these ideas, that form people differently. And I wasn't quite sure, and still I'm not sure, that as a country we have these institutions capable of sustaining the virtues of tolerance, humility, and patience. And so I did a complete punt and used the word aspirations, because you can aspire to anything, right? And so the idea is, can we create an imaginative framework that's big enough to say, regardless of your starting point, do these ideas matter? Can you see why they matter? Can you work toward them? And then eventually, and hopefully soon, we see more and more institutions that actually start forming these as habits. Because if aspirations don't become virtues, where people are using these ideas of engagement in a very real and almost second nature way, then it's going to be a pretty short-lived experiment. So aspirations have to become virtues, but we have to start somewhere. I'll also say, as I was reminding myself as I was talking, that the book itself is not a book for Christians. It's a book that's meant to be accessible and understandable to, I sort of had the 20-something or 30-something reader in mind who cares about the future of this country, who's interested in appeals to our country's history, to democratic and constitutional arguments, and the book is going to stand or fall in that framework. But I also am committed to the idea that the notions and the arguments I'm advancing in this book are fully compatible with Christian theological commitments. And so I started, as I was finishing the book, engaging in what I sort of think of as a reverse translation project, where I started writing more particularly for Christians to say, here's why these ideas, these aspirations, and these principles are compatible with Christian theology. Here's how and why Christians can engage more directly in the world.
It's a great segue, by the way, because although the book is getting great reviews from both Christians and non-Christians, this, of course, is a predominantly Christian room. So I'm wondering, John, what does the book have to say to Christians specifically?
Yeah, so I do think, there's a challenge for a lot of Christians to say, why is an argument that's not explicitly framed around the gospel going to convince me about something? And I think this is where we, I think, have to use our minds and our reasoning to say, are these ideas compatible, consistent with a gospel narrative? And so that's part of it. But then another part of it is that I think Christians of all people should be the ones leading the effort to engage across difference. So the title of the book is Confident Pluralism. The confidence is important. The confidence in our own beliefs that lets us go into those messy and risky spaces, as Jesus did and as many others since then have done. And to say, I'm going into this world of difference not out of fear or timidity, but precisely because I have this gospel confidence that lets me be in these places, and not because I'm worried about what I'm going to encounter. And I think modeling these kinds of ideas for the rest of the world, that our churches and our institutions could model that as well. If we're not going to do it, then I'm not sure who is.
So last year you co-wrote an article with Tim Keller in Christianity Today, and the exact title here is How Christians Can Bear Gospel Witness in an Anxious Age. Of course, trying to identify and unpack all the factors that contributed to this anxious age is difficult at best, but in the article there's this quote from Joseph Budham. Is that how you pronounce that, by the way? Budham? That guy. And he offered a significant insight. Let me read it. The single most significant fact over the past few decades in America, the great explanatory event from which follows nearly everything in our social and political history, is the crumbling of the mainline Protestant churches as central institutions in our national experience. Could you unpack that for us? First of all, do you agree with this statement? Second of all, if you do, could you unpack that for us?
Sure.
I'm guessing that you agree.
I do agree with it since I quoted it. And Tim actually just, I think 2 days ago, retweeted that article and said, I still stand by everything in this article. And I thought, well, that's good, because I'm glad he hasn't changed his views there. Why don't you read it again, just so everyone can hear it?
I will. The single most significant fact over the past few decades in America, the great explanatory event, as he says, from which follows nearly everything in our social and political history, is the crumbling of the mainline Protestant churches as central institutions in our national experience.
So Jody Bottom, who's written a book called An Anxious Age, is talking in the quotes from that book, talking about how when we look back historically, not all that long ago, particularly the Protestant mainline dominated the institutional landscape. So think about our universities, our churches, hospitals, social service agencies. And it was also the case, and this is it's important to sort of mention class and race here. In the white middle class, mainline Protestantism had a set of cultural values that determined largely what religion was, what values were, and there was some good and bad in that. But there was some coherence to it, and there was also some assumption that everyone believed the same thing when they didn't. But the changes that have happened, and this is Bottom's point here, is when those institutions have weakened and collapsed, it's not clear what replaces them. So you can say, depending on where you sit in this room, you can say, well, back in the day when Protestant values dominated public education, that's gone, and you can be glad about that or lament it, but the fact that it's gone raises a big question about what replaces it. There's no neutral space out there, right? This is one of the things that you all know very well. In education, whether in high school or college or beyond, there's never sort of a neutral space where you just come in and figure it out yourself. People are working and pushing values, whatever they are. And so there's a question of coherence nationally about what fills that gap. But there's also a sense in which the crumbling of the main line, which has not effectively been replaced by any other set of institutions, from Catholic circles, from evangelical circles, from secular circles, that's left us with a kind of question about what fills that gap. And I see it, and Tim and I, when we wrote the article, we're trying to make the point there that this is also a moment of opportunity for Christians, a moment of opportunity to say, as a reminder that we shouldn't feel like we set the agenda for everything, that we are aliens and strangers in this world to some point, that our home is elsewhere, but that we're called, as the book of Jeremiah says, to love our neighbors where we are, to love our cities, to love those around us, and to ask how we do that as Christians in this moment. And so in the article, and this one's free, you got to buy the book, but the article's free, and we try to walk through a couple practical implications for Christians. So we talk about not giving up on politics, especially at the local level, where you and I might sometimes think as politics as what we talk about around the Thanksgiving dinner table, but sometimes, especially in really torn and broken parts of our society, politics is a matter of life and death. So we have to be thinking as Christians, not as rulers, but as lovers of our neighbors, what politics means, and to think about the importance of working on really hard questions of race inside and outside of the church, questions that we're just scratching the surface about, and then to think about the significant challenges to religious liberty in this country, which are very real. You mentioned I'm on the board of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. InterVarsity's been kicked off a number of campuses in recent years, and so there are significant legal challenges, but there are also challenges that have to be answered in a kind of way that appeals to a broad section of citizens, Christian and non-Christian, that doesn't come across as self-interest. So that means standing up for the religious freedom of other people, not just Christians.
And I'm glad, by the way, that you mentioned not just the challenges associated with this shifting culture, but the opportunities therein. It's extremely important. I think we focus a little too much, maybe, as Christians, on the challenges and don't think enough about the opportunities. Kind of going a different direction here, John. We host a lot of different seminars and forums and panel discussions, and we work really hard with pastors and local Christian groups to bring in differing opinions so that students can hear perspectives that are different than their own. I think that's very helpful. It's very healthy. In CP, you said, and I agree, that it's important to create space to disagree. And by the way, CP being confident pluralism. Sorry, I'm looking at my own notes here. We need to create space to disagree, to talk, and maybe even fight a little bit. I just want to know what happens when Christians only interact with folks that think and pray and look and sound the same way they do. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, we do. I mean, Christians are not immune to the problem of the echo chamber, right? So when you think about this challenge, actually massively challenging our country writ large right now about the echo chambers and about where we get our information from, Christians are not immune to that. So we need to be looking, especially within the body of Christ, to say, why might my perspective on this need a better understanding? Or how can you, because you're situated differently in the world, help me see this more clearly? And we have to be, I think, graciously open to dialogue with other Christians, even when we disagree about issues. I will say, I write sometimes in national publications, and they always generate some degree of hate mail, but Christians are the nastiest. And I talk to a lot of other people who are in that public space writing, who are Christians, who get hit the hardest from other Christians, and that's a sad witness for us if that's the common experience of Christians who are trying to work in the public spaces. And so I think a degree of charity with one another, to model all of these things, not just to the world outside, but to inside the church as well.
Among all people, you'd think that Christians would be the ones practicing tolerance, humility, patience. So, let's say we do leave our echo chambers. Let's say we start interacting with those folks that are different, have different beliefs inside and outside of the church. What are some of the mistakes, and you alluded to this just now, but what are some of the mistakes that you see Christians commonly making in terms of public discourse, private conversations, or even online conversations?
Yeah, so we could start with the low-hanging fruit of online interactions, and the punchline here is get offline, right? Because this is a massive threat to our health as Christians and to churches. My friend Andy Crouch has a new book out called The Tech-Wise Family. I mean, read that book before you read my book. It's much more urgent in terms of the challenges threatening the church today and our internal practices and the ways in which we're consumed by media practices. And so how do we slow down? I have so many. I think I'm actually kind of a snarky, sarcastic person deep down, and I think I'm pretty good at the snarky humor. But because I just wrote this book on tolerance, humility, and patience, I can't do any of it online. So I have all of these.
Your hands are tied.
I am perpetually kind of frustrating myself because I have all these great tweets the takedown tweets that never get sent. And instead, so if you look at me on Twitter, it's just sort of like, here's a nice article, right? Or I spoke there today, and But just know, you all can know that in my unsent tweet folder there are some great gems. I think we need to be doing more of that, right? We need to be not responding and not commenting and not having to have the last word. I was actually just recently I had a piece where I was pushing pretty hard on a New York Times reporter that I think had, and I know her, she's a friend of sorts, but she had gotten massively wrong a description of a charismatic Catholic community. And I was pushing back at her pretty hard, and I had a draft of the piece, and the editor, who was also a Christian, wrote back to me and said, this draft, the way it sounds like you're just trying to get score the last point, right? And to tell you the truth, it comes across as pretty petty. Now, thank God I had a Christian editor who could tell me that in candor, right? And so we need to be speaking like that to each other more to slow each other down. And then I think the opportunity side of things, I think we need to be open to greater and more creative partnerships. So I love what I heard at the beginning of this night where you had representatives of other ministries get up here and say, here's how we're working together. I love hearing Lee at Crew talk about this and Howie from InterVarsity at the same table. And I mean, you all should know that of the 5 largest national campus ministries, they're growing now more than maybe ever before, and they're working together in unprecedented ways. So just this year at the National Staff Conference for Crew invited InterVarsity's Director of Campus Ministries up to the stage, and the two of them together said, here's how we can partner better in campus ministry. So what an opportunity that is, right? And as we see some of these within kind of the evangelical landscape, and instead of thinking, this is my ministry,
right,
and I have to raise the dollars and have the numbers, that we say, how can we work together? Where are our strengths and weaknesses? And how do we recognize that we're going to have differences, right? Crew and InterVarsity are two very different organizations, right? And I used to, as you mentioned, I used to be a Young Life leader. Young Life is just, they're just, I'll say this, sorry InterVarsity people, but they're just better at kind of, having fun a little bit. And so when you see those cultures clash, and the Young Life jokes are just better than the InterVarsity jokes. But you know what? We need everyone, right? And we need people together in ministry in these places. And so I'm excited and encouraged when I see that.
Good. Yeah, Camp Kanakuk is much more fun than base camp, that's for sure. We get that a lot. You wear a lot of hats. I mean, you're a card-carrying evangelical Christian at Washington University. I just want to ask, so from someone who works at WashU and also attends Central Pres, what advice do you have for parents, for pastors, youth pastors, in terms of effective discipleship and training for those students that are actually heading off to universities?
So a couple of things here. One, the first thing that comes to mind, only because I've been spending most of my time on it lately, is trying to think, how do we bridge, WashU is representative of these elite college and university campuses that look at Christians sometimes and think we've got 3 heads or something, or what are we doing on campus? And then you have a lot of churches, including churches in this area, that are suspicious of WashU. And I think for Christian faculty, there's a role for us to play as almost we're dual translators, to say to WashU, we're Christians, we're here, we're not going anywhere, and we actually care about this place, care about you, we're good teachers, we're good scholars, and we want to be with you. And then also to go into churches and say, we are, my day job is at WashU, and the people there are not all scary and crazy, and it's a great place with a lot of really good things going on. There are some problems, absolutely, and there are challenges to Christians and others on that campus, but to write it off as kind of the big scary other is not the way to go forward, I think, with the gospel. And so to help to bridge that gap and to recognize as parents, that there are people partnering with you and for your kids at these places, Christian faculty, campus ministers, local churches, and to recognize that as a tremendous gift rather than kind of an anxious worry. And I've got 3 kids, they're still little, the oldest is 10, but it's coming soon, right? So I'm thinking about these questions as a parent as well. And then the other thing I'll say in terms of preparation for college, when I was on a church staff as a high school youth pastor, the thing that I focused on the most was challenging the other spheres of kids and families' lives that were demanding commitments with a greater degree of authenticity than the church itself was.
Unpack that. What does that mean exactly?
So I would say parents would, and it was a great church, I love the people there, but sometimes the parents would say, I'm worried about the sex, drugs, and rock and roll for my kids. And I would say, what you need to be most worried about is youth soccer. Because your commitment to youth soccer is more than your commitment to the church. And when every family in the church, it might be soccer for one person or the vacation for another, but when people are giving up, when the youth pastor has to play kind of the utility role even to get people in a room. So here's what I did. We had the normal Sunday night youth group, but we also had a Wednesday night discipleship group, totally voluntary, right? Nobody had to be there. But because I'd been a lawyer before youth ministry, I wrote up a contract and had all the kids sign it. And the contract said, if you have practice scheduled on the same night as the discipleship group, you come to discipleship group. If you have a big test the next day that you didn't study for, you come to discipleship group. And then I had the parents sign the contract too. And that was the scariest part, because the pushback I got from parents who said, wait a minute, you're telling me if my kid has the midterm exam and hasn't studied, they have to be at a discipleship group? And I said, absolutely, because you and we in our actions with our kids, if we're not modeling and expecting this core commitment first to the church, then why would we be surprised when other commitments take priority? So I think this idea of modeling authentic commitment, and then also modeling maybe authentic joy in what we do. So the other thing I think about is when I was a kid in high school youth group, the arguments about why you shouldn't have sex before marriage were, you might get an STD, or you might have this emotional harm, or someone might get pregnant and so forth. Most of those arguments aren't very salient with kids today. So if you're thinking about how do you model an authentic sexual ethic for young people, you better have something to show them, right? Marriages that reflect joy and commitment, even in the hard times, and a community of the church that says, here's what we mean when we model community in a way that is different from the world and that is joyful. And is joyful whether, you're mom and dad with 2 kids, or whether you're single in the church, or whether you're widowed, and that we're actually together as a church doing this well. I'm thinking actually just spontaneously of when the solar eclipse happened here, and Central Pres, by some kind of administrative mistake, scheduled the youth ministry and the widows group together, right? But that's what the church should be all the time, Randy, right? I mean, what a wonderful co-celebration. And can we think about intergenerational community, one of the strongest assets of the church, in ways that the rest of the world doesn't have access to? And can we show that? And can we have, one of the things I'm thinking about and caring about a lot now is, can we get the 20-year-old WashU student who wants to be a doctor connected with the 70-year-old physician in St. Louis who can talk about this is what it means to follow Christ as a physician for the career. Or do that with lawyers and business people too, right? And then to say to Wash U and the other schools around here, you're talking about mentoring the whole student, but we can actually help you do this because we can get to these college students and say, we're going to partner you in community authentically with people intergenerationally. And I think that's low-hanging fruit. I think if the church and Christians can't do it, then who else are we going to look to for that?
We need to talk more. So we actually have some extra time tonight, and I'm curious if anybody here has any questions for John. If you do, I'm going to jump out and hand you the mic. I know nobody wants to ask the first question, so we'll go straight to question 2, as my friend Frank says.
Thanks for the question. I'm going to try to have an answer that offends everyone in the room, no matter what your age group is. I think one of the challenges, there is, the generational categories are way oversimplified, but I think there is a way in which the typology is somewhat helpful. And I was at a thing with Russell Moore a couple months ago, and the whole conversation was about the boomers and the millennials and how they don't understand each other, they don't get along. And after listening to this for 20 minutes, I got up to do my talk, and I started it by saying, the 80s really happened, and they were great for some of us. Gen X here, actually, we're the kind of the silent ones, but remember us. And in the moment of that, I actually thought part of the Gen X role, and I'm squarely in that generation, is back to this dual translation role, right? To say, the millennial talk about the boomers as, you got to understand the tremendous wisdom and talent and giftedness and patience in that generation. And to the millennials, to the tremendous excitement and intelligence and creativity, and that there is this, we're the church, we're in this together. So to the institutional point, I think it's helping and we can only do this with everyone from all of the generations, but helping some of the boomer generation recognize that some institutions cannot stay the same, right? They're an older model for lots of reasons. Some of this is about race within the church. Some of it's about old models that are not as effective as they once were 50 years ago. So some institutions have to change, some institutions have to die. And then to the millennials, I think one of the urgent challenges is to say, and you need institutions. So you can't just create, a new startup every day or just talk about ideas, but you actually have to embed these in institutions. And maybe you don't know exactly how to do that. So maybe the best way is to work with each other to say, here's how we can help you create new institutions. Here's how we can change old institutions without, not all of them have to be destroyed, right? There's this sense in some sectors that you just have to throw the table up and clean house, and that's not going to work either. So how do you work smartly and patiently and together with existing institutions and building new ones? I think that's part of the institutional question. But we have to, none of us are going to be able to do this by ourselves. We need each other. What's happening with free speech as a category right now is fascinating. And because I study this professionally, it's sometimes hard to step back and think about it in another way, but it's a fascinating moment in our country's history. And it's actually, I don't think it's just sort of a radical left. There's a radical right that's doing it too. And there is an increased pressure on a shared commitment to free speech as a value, a constitutional value and a civic or cultural value. And where that comes out in the wash, I think, I don't know where that ends, but there is work to be done. So when you look at the polling data and the growing sense in which a lot of people, especially younger people who are polled, say that we don't think free speech should be a strongly protected absolute value, that's a disturbing trend that forgets kind of how we got there. Free speech comes at a tremendous cost. And so one of the things, I think Christians actually, we need to do a really good job of acknowledging the cost right? It's and you know, as a strategy, it's a terrible strategy to get the loudest mouth in the room, right? The most offensive person possible to your campus to demonstrate the value of free speech. Don't do that, right? Find someone who can seriously discuss hard issues, but do so in a way that models the love of Christ that we all share. And then to say, and this is why these ideas matter, and this is why, despite the tremendous cost that free speech comes with, that it's better than the alternative. And so this is a discussion that has to happen, and I'm optimistic that we've faced major free speech challenges before in our country's history, and we've sometimes learned from those challenges, and we'll see what happens going forward. But I will say, whether it's speech or religious freedom or anything else, I think this is now specific to Christians, but we have to do a better job of recognizing that in the current climate of this country, as important as what we're saying is how we're saying it and who's saying it and what we're showing. That's not to say, I'm not at all saying that what we're saying doesn't matter. It matters tremendously, right? And we're accountable for our words, so we have to take that seriously. But we have to recognize that this is an expressive culture, and it's a emotive culture that responds to sorts of things. So think about, for example, the recent Supreme Court case around the contraception coverage under the Affordable Care Act, and you had the Little Sisters of the Poor on one side of that case. I know the people who litigated that case at the Beckett Fund, and when they were at the steps of the Supreme Court, the press conference they held was flying in a bunch of nuns in their habits, right, to be on the front steps of the Supreme Court. That matters, right? It matters that it was the nuns speaking. And so how we think about how we're saying things and the stories we're telling, this is another thing that fascinates me. By the way, I realize I've totally hijacked your question, but thank you for letting me do that.
You got the microphone.
That's right, they can't take it away. But I think Christians, we should be really good storytellers, right? The gospel is an incredibly effective and important story. Jesus was an amazing storyteller. So why is it that we today seem to be telling terrible stories, right? Why can't we've just got to do a better job of showing. Now this isn't, but here, if I haven't offended you yet, here it comes. I don't like the word winsome. I think, because they hear Christians saying if we could only be more winsome. Well, I don't think that strategy is going to work, right? I don't think winsome is going to get you there. But we should at least be telling good stories, to model as Jesus did, that we are people who are compellingly following Christ. We love our neighbors. We care for them. We're not going away, right? Whatever the challenges that come, we're still going to be loving our neighbors, right? When the next hurricane happens, it's going to be Christian ministries that are driving the relief efforts alongside other partners, right? And if we lose that ability to do and to demonstrate and to tell, then there's not a whole lot left worth protecting.
It's a good note to end on, John. We appreciate your time tonight. By the way, he's going to be here for a little while after the event ends at 9. If you want to purchase a book, talk to him a little bit, ask a question, there's time to do that. So please give John a round of applause. Thank you so much. So we try to do our best at Faith Ascent to link the right speakers with the right topics at the right time, and we really felt like what John had to say was timely. So thanks again, John. So as I sort of wrap up here, I guess the question I want to ask is, what would it look like if we took seriously not just the challenges, but also the opportunities that our pluralistic society presents to us? What would America look like if Christians of all ages had a proper confidence in the gospel, and that was seasoned with tolerance, humility, and patience? So I thought a lot about that as I was reading John's book and watching dozens of videos. And it's a noble vision, and I think it's a vision that Jesus is smiling on, even if it's not sprinkled with proof texts. I really do. So thanks for writing that. It encourages and challenges both Christians and non-Christians. So that being said, I think as important as it is, and John talked about this, as important as it is to practice confident pluralism,
as we navigate differences of opinion outside of the church, I can't help but think about the importance of practicing confident pluralism inside the church. When I was praying and thinking about what to say tonight, I thought it might be interesting. We're not going to do this, by the way, but I thought it'd be interesting to see how well the Christians in this room survive and thrive through deep differences at their tables. And I thought up some questions that I thought would create some controversy. Here's just a few of them. Do not ask these questions, by the way, until after the event. But here are just a few that I sort of spitballed. One, what roles, if any, do you believe the sign gifts play in the church today? And I was going to ask you to discuss that as a group for a few minutes. In addition to Scripture, what authoritative role, if any, do you believe tradition plays in the church? Should Christians baptize babies? How old do you think the earth is? Really? Did God choose you, or did you choose God? Here's a good one. Is Kirk Cameron really a good actor? Friends, these are divisive questions. So I'm not going to do that, but really let's maybe tend to the wolves within our own fences. You know, as Frank Herbert says, the packs outside might not even be a threat. One of the many miracles I've witnessed at Base Camp has been the unifying trends I see among students. I already told you about the speakers that God's been so gracious to bring to our doorstep, speakers from every tribe and tongue. But I want to look for a little bit at our student breakdown. Last summer, 2017, we had 157 students representing 53 different churches at camp. 36 non-denominational. We all know that some of those are undercover Baptists with cool websites. We had 20 Baptists, loud and proud Baptists. We had 16 Presbyterians. These are churches, by the way. 16 Presbyterian churches represented. PCA, EPC, OPC. 6 Assemblies of God. 5 E-Free. 4 Methodist. 3 Pentecostal. 2 Lutheran, that is LCMS. And 4 students were without church homes. So for many of these students, and I heard these stories, by the way, and you're going to hear some in just a second, but for many of these students, this experience at Base Camp was their first opportunity to fellowship with Christians from other denominations. We're talking like 16, 17, 18-year-old students that have never hung out with the Pentecostals across the street or the Frozen Chosen on this side of the street or what have you, right? And I'm telling you, in my interactions with these students, in our surveys, we found that students really appreciate the kind of diversity that we introduce them to. Now, granted, it's safe diversity. It's all Christians, but they love it. They love it. And I know we're all interested in equipping and teaching the kids, but maybe, just maybe, the kids have something to teach us. Here are a few words from the kids that we serve, representing over 50 different churches here in St. Louis. Go ahead and press play on that.
There you go.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this evening's broadcast.
So a few years ago, I started to question my faith, and I couldn't settle for the elementary school, Sunday school answer for why I believe in Christ. I've learned so much here. At Faith Ascent Base Camp, it's not like you're settling for any Sunday school answers. So I thought that was pretty cool.
In youth ministry, I've always been taught how to be a Christian. But at this camp, for the first time, I'm actually being taught why I should be a Christian. And this is really the first time that I've really gotten real factual evidence as to why I should be following this faith, because otherwise it's just a blind faith.
Well, my favorite thing about Faith Ascent, I think, was just the range of topics. They're all just so amazing. Like from why we should believe the Bible, the historical evidence, relativism, to things like seeing Christ in literature and music, even in the secular world, and how we can relate to other people and when we are doing apologetics.
I was not quite sure what to think at first. I was thinking that, oh my gosh, it's going to be way out of my comfort zone, and I don't know if I'm going to really enjoy this. But when I got here, I completely changed my opinion about it, and I love all of the speakers and how in-depth we get into the topics.
When I first heard about Faith Ascent, I was actually kind of scared that it would be for all the really intellectual people who want to be deep theologians and everything like that. And I think maybe some of my friends would think that too. But no, I could just see how each of the sessions was really tailored towards what we need to hear. Topics that are very, very relevant.
I don't think there was a single teacher that I didn't enjoy listening to. You could tell everybody was extremely knowledgeable in the subject that they taught. You could tell a lot of prayer went into deciding what topics were going to be discussed. You could tell there was just a lot of intentional effort put towards everything in the camp.
It's okay to have doubts. A lot of people think they have to stifle those and put on a really good show for all their other Christian friends. But you don't, because we all have these doubts, and you need to grapple with them or else they're going to consume you. The great thing about Faith Ascent Base Camp is that it's a very safe environment. You can ask questions, it's very comfortable, and the answers you get are very satisfactory.
It was very empowering, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning about what I believe, because before that I was guessing a lot. I mean, I did trust my parents, but I wanted to know it for myself.
This was something unlike anything I've ever experienced before. Like, you guys gave us pages for notes, but I took like 2 or 3 pages per lecture. This is the meat. This isn't for kids, for infants. This is the meat. This is for us.
I've actually been to a camp which was very similar to this, but the difference that stuck out to me is how the students are treated like adults. The people in authority are in authority, but they're also coming alongside you to guide you and even learn with you, and that's really stuck out to me.
I feel like so many Christian camps have all these great devotions and small group times and worships and games and activities, but I feel like a lot of times they stay at the surface level. But I could immediately tell the Faith Ascent Base Camp went deeper than that.
Base Camp reminded me basically that you can't separate God from everything. History, science, philosophy, everything definitely speaks to the grandeur of God. Base Camp definitely has the meat that a lot of places miss. If I had learned about this a year ago, I would probably have cared a lot more about talking about it.
Why do I believe what I believe? Is it because I've always heard it growing up, or is it because I'm accepting it now as my own? Growing up in a Christian family, it seems like I know what the gospel is. It's crazy because you think you know it, but when you have to put it in words, it's really difficult.
And I'm just like sitting down and having deep conversations with people that are my age, and it's like, there are people my age that have brains out there, and it's very refreshing. If I had come to base camp a few years ago, it would have made conversations, especially at school, a lot easier.
You have your factual lectures with really knowledgeable professors from all over the United States, even here locally in St. Louis. And then you have your small groups where you really get to get in depth with other students and see what they think, and bounce ideas off them. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? So that's really cool. And then you have the more personal talks at night where they try to kind of hit home more. And then you have the awesome worship with the band, which I really, really enjoyed. It covers all your bases.
So since 2007, we've taken more than a few steps towards actualizing our mission and vision. And tonight, for the first time publicly, actually, I'm going to be announcing a giant leap, God willing, that we're taking in 2018. So that being said, we have, for reasons both practical, I think, and providential, chosen Phoenix, Arizona as the location for Base Camp 2. Base Camp West, we're calling it. And on July of 2018, hopefully this will be the first of several summer camps outside of St. Louis that we'll be hosting. It's going to be at Arizona Christian University, and my plan is to take our program playbook, you could say, and to really just mimic the success that we've experienced here in St. Louis in another state. We've done our due diligence, we have contacts there, and again, God willing, we believe that we can succeed. So starting in January, with the help of some of our Phoenix contacts,
I'm going to be implementing some fundraising campaigns there to cover the cost of that camp. And we're aiming for about 50 to 100 students. We think that's a realistic goal. But this is why we're here tonight. I can't spend my time doing that unless I know that our St. Louis fundraising efforts are shored up. So tonight, I'm not asking anybody to give towards Phoenix or towards Atlanta or any of the other places that we're targeting. I'm asking you guys to prayerfully consider making a generous gift towards St. Louis and specifically towards Base Camp 2018. So let's talk numbers a little bit. How much does this cost? Well, it costs us about $1,000 per student, and that's indirect and direct costs, by the way, but it costs us about $1,000 per student to send kids through 4 days and 5 nights of fun and fellowship and intense preparation at Base Camp. The students are paying about $500, so that leaves us with a $500 per student fundraising goal. So here's how these numbers break down. It's about $1,000 per student, minus $500 tuition, $500 per student. In 2018, our Base Camp goal is to have 200 students at Lindenwood University. It's in the last week in June, by the way. Tonight, oh, and by the way, so this is our dinner goal. Our dinner goal tonight is to raise $100,000. As I mentioned earlier, we've already raised $25,000, so that leaves us with $75,000 that we would like to raise tonight. There are about 300 people in this room. That is approximately $250 per person. The board and I, and I think probably all of our speakers too that are here tonight, we want you to consider a few things before you write anything down on this card. Number one, we don't want you to think of your donation to this mission as a charity. We want you to think of it as strategic philanthropy. Now, what's that? In short, strategic philanthropy is the process of identifying what you want to see society look like and then using your donation strategically to actualize that vision. The results that we're seeing here in St. Louis are the results that we want to see in Phoenix and beyond. And if our vision runs parallel to your vision, then maybe, just maybe, God is calling you to give generously to this work. Number two, in terms of strategic philanthropy, your first priority is to your home church. Please don't commit to partnering with us tonight if it will have a negative impact on the mission of your home church, okay? It's for your church family, not for us. And then three, for those of you that already support the mission, and many of you are here, my hope is that you know everything that you need to know to continue supporting this work in good faith. And I'm asking you, if you feel moved, to increase your support by 25% this year and next year. In addition to our base camp goals, of course, our general operating budget must be shored up as well in order for me to properly execute our expansion plans. If you don't feel called to make a donation, at the very least, take advantage of the products, goods, and services that we have for sale, okay? Send a student to base camp. It's $500. It's a week of intense preparation for the challenges, but also for the opportunities that they're going to encounter in an academic environment. A closing note, I want to make sure that nobody leaves here hearing something that we didn't intend to say. I know sometimes we talk about base camp and apologetics and the life of the mind as if it's some sort of magic bullet, or if it somehow substitutes the work of the Holy Spirit or replaces, and that's not the case. I want you to really hear me on this. Faith Ascent could go away tomorrow, and God, through the power of His Spirit, would still be relentlessly pursuing the kids that you love, okay? But we're on to something neat here, and I do believe the Holy Spirit's working through this ministry, and I hope you do too.
Let's pray.
Father, we just thank you for your leadership and guidance by your Holy Spirit in this ministry, God, to help prepare high school students for the future that they face in college. We just pray for continued success. We pray continue moving on the hearts of the students and parents to send their youth to Faith Ascent. We pray for all the planning in the future for it, God, and we just pray that each of the students would continue to follow you and be bold, courageous witnesses for you as they go on in their education and their future careers. Thank you for what you've done tonight, and we pray for continued success in the Faith Ascent ministry. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.